Every day, millions of people get behind the wheel expecting to make it home safely. But for some, a moment of anger on the road turns into a decision that changes lives forever. We're taking a look at road rage criminals reacting to life sentences. Mackenzie Sharilla, friends and family members had been begging Dominic Russo to break up with his girlfriend, 17-year-old Mackenzie Sharilla, for quite some time. The recent graduate from Strongsville High School had gotten together with the 20-year-old business owner in 2018. The relationship had its ups and downs, but things came to a head in 2021 when Mackenzie started openly talking about unaliving Dominic's life with her car. Dominic's mother talked about an incident in July 2021 where someone had to come pick up her son because Mackenzie had threatened to unalive him. In July of 2022, Mackenzie, Dominic, and his friend, Davion, were found unconscious in Mackenzie's Toyota as it had crashed into a brick wall. Responding officers claimed that it seemed like the car had split into two. Dominic and Davion were pronounced unalived at the scene, and Mackenzie was airlifted to a hospital, requiring multiple surgeries. The road to recovery was not easy for Mackenzie, but she miraculously survived. According to friends, Mackenzie was inconsolable when she learned Dominic and Davion had passed away. The police chalked it down to an accident, but then Davion's sister started getting suspicious. For starters, Mackenzie was a popular social media influencer who immediately went back to posting about her healing journey online. This included her posing in her wheelchair at concerts, stating that she was just someone who couldn't be unalived. Mackenzie had also arranged a Halloween party where she dressed up dummies as the corpses of Dominic and Davion. Police were alerted, and they started investigating the matter. They reviewed CCTV footage and made a shocking discovery. One camera showed the trio normally riding in their car as they made their way back from a party. And then the camera at the next traffic signal saw the car speeding at over 100 miles an hour. An expert was called, who determined that the car brakes were fully functional at the time of the impact. Police also noted that when they found Mackenzie unconscious in the car, her foot was still on the gas. She was called back for an interrogation and claimed that she blacked out during the incident and could not remember anything, but the case was clear now. In November 2021, Mackenzie was charged with vehicular homicide and possession of illegal substances, which were found on her at the time of the crash. While her defense team argued that this was a mistake and that Mackenzie's crash impacted her just as much as anyone else, the prosecution disagreed. They claimed that she knew what she was doing and showed recorded evidence of Mackenzie visiting the same site just 3 days before the event. They also pointed out that Dominic's side was the side that was struck against the brick wall. Davion just became collateral damage in the crime. Mackenzie cried throughout the trial, claiming her innocence. The judge, however, called her hell on wheels and sentenced her to serve 15 years to life in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 2038. Jesus Ayala and Jazamir Keys. In 2023, 17-year-old Jesus Ayala and 16-year-old Jazamir Keys stole a vehicle and intentionally crashed into Andreas Probst, the former chief of police for Bell, California, as he rode a bicycle in the Centennial Hills neighborhood. Prosecutors claimed that the duo was on a destructive streak that evening, stealing 4 vehicles and attacking anyone and everyone they saw. They had even attacked another bicyclist that evening and a driver in a parked car, both of whom survived with some major injuries. However, Andreas was not as lucky and passed away at the scene. For a week, investigators believed that it was a classic case of a hit and run and could not trace it back to the teens. It was not until a high school student alerted police to a video Jazamir had uploaded online, showing the incident. He was even recorded saying, "It is not that serious," after crashing into Andreas. Police were then able to zero in on the teens and charge them with vehicular homicide and reckless endangerment, among a list of other things. Ayala was also found to be involved in a July 2023 stabbing incident, but his defense team denied culpability in either case, alleging brain damage. The prosecution, however, challenged this claim. They pointed out that he was the driver on the day of the incident, had a whole week to come forward but did not, and that when police came to arrest him, he said, "I will just get a slap on the wrist." Prosecution argued that both Ayala and Keys made use of the fact that they were juveniles, and that Nevada's law would not allow them to be sentenced to capital punishment or a life term without parole. However, the judge recognized that this was the case and decided to sentence them to 20 years to life in prison. Even by the time they would be eligible for parole, they would have spent half of their lives locked up. Dion Kimbrough. In 2022, 30-year-old Eli Hickerson called 911 to report that someone driving a white box truck had just displayed a firearm at him while driving along the interstate. Eli claimed that he was headed back home from work when a truck belonging to a construction company began swerving along the interstate, and then the driver yelling profanities at him. Later, the driver showed him a weapon. After the 911 call was made and police were reportedly on their way, they received an emergency call from the hospital. Eli had driven himself there, bleeding out, after having been shot multiple times. Police were sure who the culprit was. Days later, they arrested 22-year-old Dion Kimbrough, who had worked a job for the construction company earlier that day and was also headed home. Prosecution claimed that Dion flew into a rage when he saw Eli signaling at him for speeding, and then picked up the phone to call the police. He then fired shots at Eli, from which he later passed away. This was a serious case, and the prosecution argued that Dion should be given the maximum sentence. The defense did not have much of a case, but they asked for leniency. The judge denied. Instead, Dion was sentenced to serve 60 years to life. Effectively, he will be over 80 years old when he even gets a shot at parole. Theodore Edgecombe. Evangelina Clearaman claimed that she was driving her car with her husband, Jason Clearaman, in the passenger seat when an altercation broke out between them and a cyclist, Theodore Edgecombe. She claimed that words were exchanged, and things got heated to the point that Theodore punched Jason, an immigration attorney. The Clearamans then followed Theodore as he rode away, allegedly to gather enough information about him to contact the police later on. However, Theodore's defense attorney painted a very different picture. He claimed that the Clearamans used racial slurs against his client and that they almost ran him off the road. What followed, according to Theodore, was an act of self-defense. However, Evangelina claims something else. In any case, Theodore shot at Jason, instantly unaliving him. In court, he was apologetic for the events and claimed that he wished he could change what happened that day. Both sides had their supporters in court during Theodore's sentencing, one arguing for leniency and the other pushing for capital punishment. Theodore's defense team pointed to the video footage of the incident that showed Jason approaching him. They alleged that he was intoxicated at the time of the incident. However, the judge noted that Theodore's self-defense claim was not valid because he shot Jason right in the temple, in an act of pure rage. He also pointed out that Theodore's previous convictions prohibited him from carrying a firearm. With all the facts in front of him, the judge sentenced Theodore to 25 years of initial confinement and 12 years of extended release. Theodore's family continues to fight the charges. Cameron Bernard. At just 19 years old, Cameron Bernard sealed his fate when he fired into another vehicle, shooting 3 passengers and unaliving one of them, Ryan Hampton. This was back in 2020, and investigators had to search far and wide to trace Cameron, someone with a lengthy criminal history. According to the prosecution, Cameron was in the passenger side of the vehicle when a road rage incident took place against 19-year-old Ryan Hampton. Ryan was in the car with 2 children at the time. Cameron's vehicle started pushing into Ryan's vehicle right before the alleged shooter started shooting at the vehicle. The 2 cars then collided, and Cameron and his accomplice made a run for it. Police arrived at the scene to find Ryan unalived and the 2 children seriously injured. They arrested Cameron later on, and he claimed that he was acting in self-defense after Ryan started driving recklessly. That was what his defense team alleged in court, but what the judge promptly dismissed. According to the judge, Cameron was already on probation and knew that he should not have had a firearm in the first place. He also fled the scene and then lied to the police when they first came to arrest him. With all the evidence laid out, the judge sentenced Cameron to 25 years to life in prison. Daha Hassan. Despite Daha Hassan claiming he shot at Rani Burris in self-defense, the jury believed otherwise. In 2024, Daha was reportedly driving on the wrong side of the Minneapolis interstate after midnight, also allegedly smoking in the vehicle. Randy had the right of way when the 2 cars came face to face with one another. He was also with his brother and other passengers in the vehicle during the incident. Daha refused to back away, which led to a heated confrontation between the two. Randy allegedly exited his vehicle and approached Daha. This is where he claims that Randy struck him, and he shot back at him in self-defense. The kicker, and the prosecution's whole argument, in this case, was that Randy had a neck brace and was visibly still recovering from other injuries even during the road rage incident. The jury also argued that Daha had several options that night. Simply backing his car up was one of them. yet he chose to unalive someone. The defense, however, argued that Daha acted responsibly and even called 911 himself. Body cam footage was shown in court, which showed Randy bleeding out while they waited for police. At his sentencing hearing, Daha apologized. "I never wanted to kill anyone, ever in my life. I never wanted to hurt anyone, ever in my life. This is really hard for me. And I also want to say, if it wasn't clear before, that I am sorry to the families." In the end, he was sentenced to serving 14 years behind bars. Ethan Oosterhuis and Dennis Perez. Shatera Coleman had received her master's degree just 2 months before her life was tragically taken away. In 2024, 2 men, Ethan Oosterhuis and Dennis Perez, were driving recklessly in Michigan, brake-checking one another and driving over 80 miles an hour when they rammed into Shatera's car, veering her into oncoming traffic and leading to a head-on collision that ultimately took her life. Ethan and Dennis were immediately arrested and pleaded no contest to the unaliving. Both men claimed that they had no way of knowing that their actions that day would lead to a fatality. But the prosecution disagreed, stating that road safety laws existed for a reason, and there was no way that the defendants did not know that what they were doing would ultimately end in a tragedy. Ironically, the road rage incident was between the 2 men themselves and had nothing to do with Shatera, who became collateral damage. Ethan ultimately accepted a plea deal and a 15-year conviction. Dennis' case was unique because of his behavior with the prosecution, his own defense, and jailhouse guards while he awaited sentencing. Philip Todd, Shatera's husband, was also in court during sentencing and made a victim impact statement. He stated that he was set to celebrate his 1-year anniversary with Shatera in just a few days. While delivering his emotional address, he suddenly flew into a rage after noticing Dennis yawning and acting uninterested in what he had to say. The prosecution argued that Dennis was not apologetic at all for what he had done and urged a harsher sentence. The judge agreed and sentenced him to 20 years behind bars. Christian Hillman. By the time Christian Hillam completes his sentence, he will be 119 years old. That is right. In 2017, a Grand Rapids judge found the 19-year-old guilty of a road rage fatality and sentenced him to over 100 years in lockup, effectively a life sentence. Allegedly, Christian was riding his dirt bike when 64-year-old William McFarlane came up behind him in his vehicle, flashing his lights at him. McFarlane was trying to get Christian to move out of the lane, but words were exchanged, and the two pulled up into the church parking lot. That was where eyewitnesses argued that things took a devastating turn, and Christian started assaulting McFarlane. They claimed that after pushing him to the ground, Christian continued to kick the retiree several times before eventually fleeing the scene. McFarlane was then rushed to the hospital with several broken ribs and a broken skull. Emergency doctors stated that he had very little chance of survival. Ultimately, after spending 5 weeks in a coma, McFarlane passed away from his injuries. Christian's defense team argued that it was a case of self-defense, or at least involuntary manslaughter. The jury disagreed with the plea, stating that Christian could have stopped at any moment, especially when McFarlane had already fallen to the ground. His defense team argued that McFarlane followed him into the parking lot looking for a fight and just happened to get the worst of it. Gabriel Paul Horcasitas. Gabriel's case was a first. He had fired shots at Christopher Pelkey after a road rage incident turned lethal, instantly unaliving him. That, though, was not the unique aspect of this case. The prosecution used an AI-generated visual of the late Christopher in court to address Gabriel, detailing the severity of the crime that had been committed and how it would now affect his young family. The crime occurred in 2021 when, in Chandler, Arizona, both men stopped at a red light and Christopher exited his vehicle to confront Gabriel. He believed that the 54-year-old was driving recklessly and almost endangered him. However, according to eyewitnesses, just as Christopher approached Gabriel's vehicle, shots were heard. Gabriel's defense team argued that he acted in self-defense, pointing out that he was sitting in his car when Christopher made the first move to get out and come at him directly. Still, the prosecution argued that the victim was not armed and Gabriel did not have any probable reason to shoot at him. Christopher was rushed to a hospital, where he passed away on arrival. During the trial in 2025, the prosecution tugged at everyone's heartstrings when they introduced a key witness, Christopher himself. It was an AI rendering of the deceased, created by his sister, Stacey Wales. She claimed that the rendering was a way to show everyone in the courtroom the impact of Gabriel's actions and also bring closure to Christopher's family. In the end, Gabriel was sentenced to serve a decade behind bars. Bradley Wayne Wilkinson. In 2025, Bradley Wayne Wilkinson stood in a New South Wales courtroom as a judge handed down a 16-year prison sentence for a road rage encounter that turned fatal in Blackett. What began as a heated exchange on the road escalated in seconds and ended with a man losing his life. The incident unfolded in 2024 when Wilkinson became involved in an argument with another driver, Rice Harding. Witnesses described aggressive driving between the two vehicles before both men stopped. Prosecutors said Wilkinson deliberately used his car as a weapon, accelerating forward and pinning Harding between vehicles. The impact caused catastrophic injuries. Harding was rushed to the hospital but later passed away. Wilkinson did not deny that he was behind the wheel, but his defense argued that the situation spiraled out of control in the heat of the moment. They claimed there was fear, confusion, and a confrontation that escalated too quickly. The prosecution, however, told the court this was not an accident. They said Wilkinson made a choice, a split-second decision fueled by anger, and that choice cost a man his life. Harding's family delivered emotional victim impact statements, describing the permanent hole left in their lives. Wilkinson addressed the court, expressing remorse and saying he never intended for anyone to pass away that day. But Wilkinson was sentenced to 16 years behind bars, with a non-parole period that ensures he will spend well over a decade in prison before even being considered for release. Kenneth Miles Davis, Jr. Rush hour traffic in Washington, D.C. came to a terrifying standstill in May 2021 when a road rage encounter spiraled completely out of control. Behind the wheel of a luxury sports car, 45-year-old Kenneth Miles Davis, Jr. made a decision that would ultimately cost him decades of freedom. According to prosecutors, Kenneth was driving through heavy evening traffic when he became enraged after a woman allegedly cut him off on the road. Instead of letting it go, he stopped his vehicle, stepped out with a handgun, and walked directly toward her car. Inside the vehicle were her two young children, just 11 and 5 years old. Without warning, Kenneth opened fire into the car, striking the woman and sending glass flying toward the children. As terrified drivers tried to process what was happening, Kenneth then turned and fired additional rounds toward nearby bystanders before calmly returning to his vehicle and fleeing the scene. Investigators later tracked him down and arrested him. During the trial, prosecutors argued that this was an extreme act of road rage that could have easily turned into a mass casualty event. A jury ultimately found Kenneth guilty on multiple serious charges, including assault with intent to unalive while armed and several firearm offenses tied to the shooting. He was sentenced to more than 32 years in prison. Justin Nichols. In October 2021, a routine drive through Tucson, Arizona, turned fatal when a road rage confrontation escalated into gunfire. 32-year-old Justin Clark Nichols was riding a motorcycle when prosecutors say he became involved in a heated exchange with a nearby vehicle. According to investigators, Nichols pulled alongside a car carrying 21-year-old Savannah Narcaroti and another passenger. In a burst of rage, he fired multiple shots into the vehicle while still on the road. Savannah was struck and fatally wounded, while another passenger was injured but survived. Shockingly, there was also a young child inside the car at the time of the shooting, though the child was not physically harmed. Nichols fled the scene, but police tracked him down the very next day at a hotel, where they recovered the motorcycle and a handgun that matched the shell casings found at the scene. Nichols ultimately chose to plead guilty to second-degree unaliving, along with several additional firearm-related offenses. During his sentencing hearing, the courtroom was packed with Savannah's loved ones. More than 30 friends and family members attended, delivering emotional victim impact statements describing the devastating loss. Nichols addressed them directly, apologizing and claiming he did not realize who was inside the vehicle when he opened fire. The judge acknowledged the tragedy and the senseless nature of the violence. Nichols was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Even with credit for time served, he will be nearly 50 years old by the time he is released. Dakare Kinnard. In the spring of 2023, what should have been an ordinary Saturday drive on Interstate 76 near Norton, Ohio, turned into a tragedy that would reshape two families forever. 40-year-old George Jensen was heading home from work when he became involved in a road rage confrontation with Dakare Kinnard, then 30 years old. According to prosecutors, Kinnard opened fire at Jensen's vehicle during the traffic dispute, striking him multiple times. Jensen was rushed to a nearby hospital with grave injuries but later passed away from the wounds he sustained in the shooting. Police described the encounter as an unprovoked act of rage on a busy stretch of roadway. After the incident, Kinnard fled the area but was identified as a suspect. A jury later found Kinnard guilty on multiple charges related to the shooting. In April 2024, a judge sentenced Kinnard to 15 to 17.5 years in prison, a term meant to hold him accountable for the fatal shooting and protect the community from further violence.